Thanks, Kevin. Shelley, thank you for giving us that. And now, absolutely, we want to open it up and engage in questions. Yes, Todd.
How many people live here?
A proper census? So the last census number we had was 11,600 in 2013, 11? So that's the last, and so that's, you gauge that based on kind of what you get from census, which is the only accuracy that records population. You know, and so that's one of the components for us that you worry about in terms of what your shadow populations are doing and how that's impacting you, and the development of the community with different components around the areas outside your community. So that's the other piece of it, right? And then, as Kevin talked about, the population projections, both in terms of originally a 2% growth and versus BC stats of 1%. And so for us in the community, and you see what's going on in the region with the development of our area, you wonder, are we relevant to BC stats? And that's the worry, right? In terms of how much time do we have? Absolutely. Yes? Yeah, I think that would be inclusive of Poos, they tell me. About 700 people. Yeah. Yeah, because Poos are absolutely a component to our discussions on water. We provide the services for that community, our community that's a part of that in that respect. And so they're included in this discussion, the projections, the implications, absolutely.
I also would like to know, when our water was increased double several years ago, was that increase put into a separate savings thing for the water?
So the first water increase that occurred was in 2011. So at that time, not only did we increase the rate, but we also changed the model that we used. So some of it is in a reserve for capital requirements. Most of it is for debt payments and operations, the change in the rates. So the second rate increase was in 2013. And what we were finding is that we wanted to start building some reserves instead of using borrowings, but some of it had to go for future capital requirements that were needed right away. So right now we have about anywhere from 5 to 7 million in the reserve, but a lot of that money also comes from the sale of potable water for non-potable uses as well. So some of it's in there for sure.
Is there any way we can borrow money cheaper than 14%?
Where did you get 14%?
I took it from the 29 million that we owe, and we're paying 5.7 a year in debt charges.
Oh, okay. No, basically what the city does is it borrows through the municipal finance authority, and basically interim borrowing is at about 1.7%, and a 5-year term is about 3.45, and a 10-year to a 20-year is about anywhere from 4.45 to 4.57. So debt servicing, the term that I use, includes both principal and interest. But the rates that we have at MFA right now are quite low in comparison to historical interest rates.
Okay, I have a question for council. I'm wondering why you would have gone public and asked for an opinion that isn't based on fact. that $50 million was pulled out of thin air, not knowing what the source was, what the route is, and what terrain you're going through, how much bedrock, muskeg you're going through, and you ask the public to buy a pig in a poke. Why did you do that? Why wouldn't you wait and get some more concrete figures before you went public?
So I can answer that from a bit of a perspective from, in order to engage and start to understand some of the implications, Charlie, part of it is for us to go out and get an engineered design, the cost, the route, all of that is a fairly significant expense to the community, and you start spending $1 million or $2 million just doing the design and costing. So I get the aspect of that in terms of saying, why would you do it if you still don't have any kind of stability or structure around your costing? But in order to go spend $2 or $3 million on developing a plan for it without even having the sense that the community is saying, yeah, no, absolutely, that's what you want to do. So to me, I'm going to pass it through to maybe some of my colleagues who were on council to answer that as well.
The $55 million mark there was suggested to us from people who'd done some homework on the matter, and we really, we're not saying that that is anything to do with accurate. We're trying to test the water with the taxpaying public to the degree that they would be willing to support a pipeline. So that figure didn't come out of the air. It was suggested to us by some proponents of a pipeline who had done some consultation with people in the business. Certainly there's lots of variables. Before we would entertain spending millions of taxpayers' dollars on an engineering study, surely it's important to find out whether the community believes there is a need for this rather than just a want. So we're trying to determine the degree to which the taxpaying public wish us to pursue this investigation. There are many variables, as has been our chief financial officer shared many of the variables, but there's a lot of other variables as well that enter into play here about future capital needs in other areas and which comes first. I mean, we've talked about the sewer trunk line. Well, the master sewer plan that we have, the needs for improving our sewage system are far more than that master trunk plan, that main trunk line. That's just one part of it. And where does that fit into this scenario? So there's so many things we have to consider and juggle, but the intent here is to find to make the public informed as best we can and to get back the feelings of the public about this topic.
Yeah, but
Thanks,
you're going to get an unrealistic response from the public when you don't provide the facts. That's a lowball estimate, and you could have went out there with 30 million and you'd have probably got a 90% response. I'm saying that the response from the public isn't realistic because it's based on unrealistic figures. So why would you do that?
So I'm going to, again, reiterate, I think, Charlie, from my view, and certainly that perspective, this conversation, this discussion is trying to gauge the direction that we move. And so if it's the reliability of the supply is the direction of the community is saying, we absolutely need to have the supply that we can feel confident in. And that's a pipeline. The only option we want to consider is pipeline. So then you move to the next steps and saying, now we got to put some more diligence around routing. And then you start to look at the costing component. But all that takes dough in terms of doing that. And I don't, from my perspective, I wouldn't want to spend that dough until I got the confidence that the community is saying, we absolutely need to move in this direction. So I feel your pain, but I also, from my perspective, You spend 2 or 3 or 4 million bucks, and you would spend some dough trying to deliver that, develop that information before you could get to the costing implication. That's just my own opinion.
Yeah, but isn't that going back afterwards at something? If you want to find out what the public really opinion is, you've got to provide them with facts, guys. Come on. Because if you don't, they're basing their opinion on something that's unrealistic. Because if you lowball an estimate, they're going to say, hey, this is a great idea. You know, but you got to provide the public with some facts.
Excuse me. So I think that was one of the reasons that council asked us to do this costing analysis, because we're looking at 3 different figures. So it's basically giving the public an idea of, okay, so if this is the low cost, this is what it looks like, but it could be as much as $100 million. So that could also be an impact to you. So as we're looking at these different scenarios, we're getting some information out to you, the public, who's going to make the final decision.
Thank you. My name is Helmut Petzold, and I'm a water user of Dawson Creek. I get the water delivered by truck. Consequently, we're very cautious how much water we are using. You can smell my armpit. You can see I have no ring around the collar. I'm just as clean as the next person. But my wife and I, we're using 2 cubic meters of water in 2 months. No, pardon me. In 2 months, 6 cubic meters, in 1.5. Okay. Going back somewhat, I used to be involved with the regional district. I was heavily involved with the water and sewer project in Fort St. John. Just for your record, at that time, I did a per capita investigation for Dawson Creek and Fort St. John. Fort St. John used Dawson Creek used 1/3 less than Fort St. John, for the simple reason Dawson Creek had meters at that time, Fort St. John had nothing. I don't know what they did with 1/3 extra water, what Dawson Creek did not use. So therefore, this here, we only talk about volumes. We do not talk conversation. A little blurb was there about education, which is very, very important. Never heard the word of gray water in all the conversation. There's so much water going down the drain, which could be used, would not reduce the water intake considerably. What does it matter if the water down toward Bruce is a little dirtier than the clean water what is running down when people have a shower, a massage? They don't have a shower. They're not that dirty. They just go in there for 20 minutes and get the tickly feeling. So if we get that public education, we do not have to talk or think about costs. Just start first. Years ago, we used to have a vehicle that took 25 liters per 100K. Now we're talking 10 liters per 100K. So therefore, with water, we could reduce just as much and save all the costs and save all the controversy. Just save the water. Nobody's going to hear about it. Just public be educated. If a study has been done, the U.S., they could live comfortably with 10% of the water they use at this point in day. So therefore, let's get with it and conserve water instead of let it run down the drain. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. And maybe I'll get administration just to talk a little bit about consumption versus the city consumption versus some of the other communities, how we stack in there. Yeah, do you guys have that? Do you have?
No, I was going to say that's a good question. I don't have it right off the top. I know when we looked last year, our consumption numbers, we included residential, commercial, industrial, and we were around 450 liters per person per day. Now, I think that is above the average, but again, that's inclusive of commercial and industrial. And I think if you back that out, you may find that just from a residential component, we're in pretty comparable shape.
And so the part of the water process over the last 2 or 3 years by the rates to encourage conservation measures, has that seen a reduction in consumption use?
You
As
def-
mentioned by Helma?
Definitely in residential. I think we saw close to 20%, 18% reduction in residential consumption due to rate increases. So, yeah, I think from a residential side, it's good.
Thank you. Got one back here, Arlene.
Yeah, just a quick question. The new Water Sustainability Act was approved last week, which makes some pretty significant changes to the legislation. Has council looked at that at all yet? It changes priority rights, and it does allow for some planning purposes on some of the watersheds.
Yeah, you bet, and I'll pass that over to Jim.
Yeah, so a couple of points on the new Water Sustainability Act. One point is that by and large, the regulations apply to new permits and licenses only. By and large, the conditions of the City of Dawson Creek's permit aren't going to change. There are other things in the Water Sustainability Act around, for instance, licensing groundwater that are going to be impactful in the area, but not necessarily to the City of Dawson Creek's license. That process on the Water Sustainability Act actually started in about 2008 with a program called Living Water Smart. And city employee at that time, Emmanuel Machado, was part of the original advisory committee on that process. And since that time, we've been involved on a staff level in technical terms and on a council level providing formalized feedback to the process. Water is a highly regulated commodity in British Columbia. There are about 8 or 9 federal acts that potentially impact on regulating water. There's about 18 provincial acts, and the Water Act, now the new Water Sustainability Act, is the key piece of that. The best things in the new act are around the coordination of all those various regulations. But in truth, the circumstances of our existing license are not much impacted. I will say that any application for a new permit from a new source, for instance the Peace, is going to have to meet all of the aspirations in the Water Sustainability Act. And that act says, for instance, that environmental use is the highest priority. It says in times of shortage that human use, livestock use, and fish habitat are to be preserved at the expense of all other uses. Those are very impactful things as you're going forward, particularly if you're in a drought-prone area. So those are important considerations. The provincial government published a little list of what you could do as a water user. That's as an individual or as a community or as, say, farming operation that had a water license to prepare yourself for the Water Sustainability Act. The first thing they said that you ought to do is you ought to get to understand your water source as well as you can. That's been an ongoing priority for my council for about a half a dozen years. You saw quite a bit of the outcome of that in the Sure Water Phase 1. We understand our water source at a level we never have before. The second thing you could do, the province suggested, would be to look at increased storage or additional water sources, and that's exactly what we're here tonight about. And the third thing they said, to Helmut's point, was to find ways to conserve water. Really, we think we have been cognizant of the new Water Sustainability Act and that we have been acting to prepare ourselves for that act.
Thanks, Jim. Arlene, you had a...
I think that it's obviously quite a complicated issue, and most of us probably have the same axe to grind, which is we don't particularly want to see huge tax increases. Now, just as an example, and this isn't directly related to the city, our assessment increase coupled with our water bill increase this year is going to amount to about $500 a year in 1 year. Now, what's to say that in the next 2 or 3 years, the assessments don't go up again. And we again have a fairly substantial increase. So that's totally aside from what could happen if the water projects go ahead in an expensive manner. The second thing I comment on is I noticed that we have about reached half the capacity to spend on loans. And those loans come in, I presume, at a renewable rate that some of them have been borrowed for another 4 years, another 5 years, or whatever. So if they come in and the interest rates have gone up, then the city could then have less freewheeling, right? And what you can, so what I'm trying to say is I think it's a fairly complicated issue, and I think that we as individuals probably have an overall gut feeling of how we want things to proceed. But the bottom line is the people who are elected, I hope, will go into it in a lot more detail than most of us can put in an hour. So good luck to you guys.
Thank you. And so I want to maybe just pass on some of that about the debt servicing.
Yeah, I can answer that. So basically, the debt that the city holds is broken down into 10-year issues and 20-year issues. 10-year is for the road work. So usually the interest rate is fixed for that 10-year period. Also on a 20-year, you can pay out or renew at a 10-year if you choose. We never have, because usually the rate is fixed at the beginning of the 20-year. So that variability that you're talking about really isn't an issue with the debt that we have right now.
Hi, thanks. I've got two questions. One is I think I share a common concern that, if it's a drought year, where we've experienced it for, multiple summers of running out of water. So I mean, that's what kicks off the whole thing. So my first question is, I was just looking for confirmation. We do have the land and the ability and fixed costs and pricing already to increase our water storage. Like, do we have that? I thought we did, but can you talk on that? And the second one was, somebody brought to my attention that if we brought water from the Peace River, it's a lot different water than where our source is now, and that we'd need a completely different treatment plant or different system. And is that cost part of that 50 million? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to turn that over to Kevin.
Yeah, so on the first question on the reservoir, so we've done a conceptual design and conceptual costing. We did that just about the same time the proponents came in with the pipeline proposal. So we brought that forward to council. At that time, the numbers were around $22 million for that reservoir. And then we kind of halted the process to go through the Surewater campaign that we've done now for the last year and a bit. Second question, on the water composition, yes, it is different in the Peace River. It's got more iron and manganese in there. So we would have to change the filtration process with the treatment plant. The extent of which we haven't looked at totally yet, but we do know that we'd have to make some changes.
I just think that the groups could do some brainstorming on creative fundraising, let's say from industry, to alleviate the pressure from taxpayers.
So I'm going to, from my perspective, certainly I think that's a process that we need to engage in terms of understanding federal infrastructure grant program, the provincial process. I attended and did a presentation to our neighbors just to the east in Saddle Hills. And there's a rural area who are looking at an opportunity of trying to improve the service to their community. And so we're going to expand that a little bit in a conversation discussion to say, is there an opportunity for us to partner with them in terms of doing something? So we're looking at all of those components around trying to find ways to be look at the maximizing the opportunity of finding the revenue, the revenue for it, and minimizing the impacts to the community. You see that, that scares, like for me, that's scary, right? In terms of seeing that kind of impact to our community. And so it's complex in terms of what we're doing. We need to plow all that ground. And to Charlie's point, at what point do we start to put some, is it necessary for us to say 16,000 or 20,000 people saying, we got to kick in some confidence in our system, and if it is a pipeline, then let's do the engineering, let's do the analysis, let's do the understanding of the financial impacts to us as a community. But it's a complex conversation and discussion that we're going to engage in, and we got to plow every piece of rock we can to find out options and opportunities with industry, with other partners, and within the provincial and federal government to maximize the revenues and minimize the impacts to us, right? But we got to answer that question about, first of all, do we have confidence in the growth of our community that it's going to be 17, 18, 20,000 people? You know, our community is an unusual community because you look at anywhere else in the province or any other city, everybody's built on beside a river and a lake, right? We don't have that luxury. We got to make sure that we have a reliable, adequate, sustainable, in my opinion, source, supply for the long term. And we're going through a transformation like we've never felt in our community in our history of 80 or 100 years of what I think we have ahead of us. And that's a worry to me in terms of making sure we do that. So how the complexity of where do we go? Do we have will we even get the ability to put another source in through the Water Act? How do we fund it? What's the most logical opportunity of leveraging partnerships? Those are all conversations that we need to do. And from my perspective, I'm going to take the initiative to try and engage you guys in every piece of that, rather than making a preconceived, predetermined destination that we're going to try to get to.
So one of the questions in the survey says, you know, if you believe a water line is what you need or want, how much would you be willing to pay a year for it? Because the truth of the matter is there's no free lunch. There is absolutely no way you guys are getting a water line to the Peace at no charge. Anyone who thinks that probably said yes when they phoned up and said, you won a trip to Hawaii, all you've got to do is give me your credit card number. So identify for us. That's what the survey's about. Pick a range that you think you might be willing to pay if you believe we need a water line, and that sets the goalposts for how much funding has to come from other places. How much do we have to try to get from industry? How much do we have to try to get from government? But you're going to pay something, so tell us what you're willing to pay.
Kevin, last year at the meeting, Bear Hole was mentioned, and it was mentioned that the license or our license for Bear Hole was for storage only. Am I hearing tonight that that has changed and we can now use out of Bear Hole?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's correct. We've had some discussions with the ministry, and that's exactly right. Is they've enabled us to manage it much like a reservoir, because they're as interested in it as we are to see how it responds. So yeah, we've got permission to release, and we have tried it to see how it works, and it's worked well. So it's giving us some new tools in the toolbox, so to speak.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that Bear Hole Lake. Get in here just ahead of me on it. But I understand that's available, right?
Yes.
It's available at any time if we need it.
Yes. We have the ability with the weir now in there to manage the flow should we require it.
Yeah, you could open the gate and give us some water.
Yes.
Well, what's the big worry? You know, what the hell do we need a pipeline for? I'm sure there's lots of water up there. It's a pretty big looking lake according to that picture.
That's exactly the feedback you kind of want to engage in tonight.
Yeah. And another thing too, these here surveys that you go, you know, they're about as phony as I am. No, they are. You said 2/3 of the people. you got in one of these surveys. I take 4 or 5 of these home, fill them out, and throw them in the mailbox. Right? Would you like to take a showing of hands here now for who would sooner go with the Bear Hole or the pipeline? Would you like to do
Sure,
that?
yeah,
Huh? Would you?
yeah.
Okay, let's go for it.
Who wants to go to Bear Hole? Who wants a pipeline? Thanks for showing up. It's a complex conversation. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Now, the thing is, you can spend $100 million on that pipeline, say, and you may never need to use a drop of that water.
Yeah,
You got sufficient supply in the Kiskatnaw River and Bear Hole Lake, and there's that. I don't think it's a very good choice putting that pipeline in. You may not need it at all.
And so I want to make it clear. I haven't made this choice. These guys haven't made this choice. These guys haven't made the choice. We want you guys to be engaged. You guys are the ones that should be the ones driving the choice. That's exactly it. I'm passing the buck. So I'm good with that. I'm good with you blaming me. But it doesn't change the complexity of the decision we make for our community, not only for today, but in 20 or 30 or 50 years. And here's what I've learned over the last 6 or 7 months of somebody who grew up and spent 58 years in this community. We're transforming. We started as an agricultural community, as a transportation community. We got some lumber and we've had some mining. We're transforming this community, and it's going to transform into an energy community. And we need to understand the impacts of that and what it's going to do to us, I think, in the future, and the demands of our infrastructure. And water is a huge, huge piece of that. And so to me, the complexity of supply, distribution, how we use it, what we use it for, that's, honest to goodness, I have nothing but respect for this community and you guys. You need to engage, and this isn't a dictatorship, it's a democracy. And we need to be able to engage people in the conversation so to help guide us in the direction we take on behalf of the citizens today and our kids and our grandkids in 30 or 40 or 50 years, because they'll be paying for it as well.
Now, we've been short of water for 20 years in this town, and we've got water restrictions every year, so bad that we can't even water our lawns. And then last year, we come up with the talks on what we're going to do with our water system, and we have no restrictions last year. I don't know why that was, because we've had them for the last at least 10 or 15 years. And administration and council seem to be slanted a little negative on spending this money. Everything we hear from administration and council, they seem to be negative to fixing our water situation. And Bear Hole Lake, we've been working on that system for 20 years that I know of, building bigger weirs, shooting off the beavers and everything else. And every year we're still short of water.
Yeah, Brian, like I said right out of the gate, we're in that unenviable situation of being a community that's not built beside a major river or lake, and we got to manage the growth of our community in the future and what it means to us in terms of how do we find that supply to meet the needs of today, tomorrow, and the future. And I honestly, I'm not sure how or what I've done to infer, or we've done to infer that we're being negative or we're preconceived. I got no preconception about this. I'm worried about the dough for this community in today and tomorrow, and maximizing how we leverage that. That's my concern. And then at the same time saying, if we're going to be a community that's going to face significant growth and get to 17 or 18 or 20,000 people, we need to have water. We need to have water. We need to have safe roads. We need to have sewer. We need to have solid, reliable, sustainable, healthy, quality infrastructure. And so to me, it's guiding that is what we need to do for what is going to be the best decision and direction for this community. And from my own perspective, you say you want my opinion? I think the opinion is we need to make sure that that supply that we have is going to meet our needs, and understand the analysis that these guys do on the technical component and this Bear Hole Lake and that change with the reservoir system give us the confidence that we're going to get to 20 or 25,000? I don't know. Absolutely. And so the comment was, we've lived through droughts, we've had droughts, we don't want to have it and experience it again in the future, and so we need to understand that. So thank you. So I got one more over here, Melon, and
thank you. I was on council for 9 years, a number of years ago, and we went through this conversation year after year after year, and we were always scared off by the cost. And I've talked to people that were on council prior to that, and it was the same story. To me, water is one of the highest priorities that we have in this city. We can't take it for granted. We need water for our residents. And personally, I feel that we need water for growth. We need water for future industrial opportunities. We don't have enough water now for the industry that we have. We continually are restricting or banning the use of water for industry. Our residents in this city, that's where the jobs are, is with industry. If you don't have industry, you don't have to worry about population. So population is only one part of the equation. You have to look at future opportunities. Now, the example that sticks in my mind here recently, and it's not with water, it's with electricity, but it's a parallel example. We've got two major nitrogen producers in this city. We don't have enough electricity to run those plants. They're in a position where they have to generate electricity on their own using diesel generators or natural gas or something. That is not the way that you grow a community. The reason that we have fair share, in my mind, was to provide infrastructure, because the government and industry at that time saw the future, saw the kind of development we're going to have in this community, and they told us at that time, we better be prepared. So the fair share was provided for that reason, and I don't think that we've stepped up to the plate personally. And I was part of the problem, and I admit that, but I think because water is such a high priority, we have to start looking at everything that we are doing in this community, everything that we're spending tax dollars on, and start weighing the priorities. Like if we're cutting grass in a park somewhere, is that a higher priority than providing sufficient water? And I know there's people that don't care about the growth. They are fine with the status quo. I'm on the side that wants growth. I want economic development. I think that's the future of our community. So I think these things have to be discussed. The money that we're spending, is it a higher priority than water? And I think the numbers up here are all great. The arithmetic is fine, I don't see a problem with it. But I don't see any evidence that there have been items identified that may be lower priority where we could put together money quicker than what they've talked about. So, you know, I think it's a basic, do you want growth or do you want status quo? If you want growth, you have to provide the infrastructure, and water is one of the most critical aspects of infrastructure.
Thanks, Paul. And so, and so clearly the core infrastructure of water, sewer, roads, and this year and over the last 2 years, council has had the priority of capital infrastructure as the sewer trunk line. We had residences in our community flooding with raw sewage over the last 2 or 3 years because of the growth that's going on in our community, and the aging infrastructure, just the capacity wasn't able to handle that growth. So there's $8 million this year for us that we had to spend in terms of building that infrastructure, and there's more of that prioritization. So I completely agree with you in the prioritization process. It's just the demands on it. So thank you. I appreciate the comments.
Where's the growth if we only have 11,000 people?
Yeah, no, so Noob, that's the question about in terms of how do you plan for the growth and how do you manage the growth, understanding what's happening to you today and the projections of what's coming, right? Yeah, so all I can say is the 2011 census was 11.6, and that's the short of doing another census or doing your own poll. That's what you go by, right? Okay.
Dale, I just want to make some observations like on our growth, and we have to be very careful about our estimates on our growth, because to me we have to realize that our growth over the last number of years has been minimal, but we also have to realize that we are a sandwich community. We are no different than Hythe or Beaver Lodge. We're between two larger centers, Grand Prairie and Fort St. John. So, and that's evidenced by what has been happening. Look at how long the Zellers area has been without occupancy. Okay, the cleaners building, we don't have a cleaners in town. That building hasn't sold to do anything. Look where WestJet is flying out of now. And all these little indicators suggest that we got to be careful when we're estimating growth, eh? You know, and the beat goes on. We've lost a jeweler store that is still operating under the same name in Fort St. John. We've got a two-story office building between Bill's News and the Bank of Nova Scotia that has sat empty for many years. So we've got to be careful when we estimate growth, and I think that is going to take a little time. To say that if we build a pipeline, industry is going to come isn't going to happen. We've got to be very careful about estimating our growth in those areas, because all the signs point to that we're in competition with our big brothers. So we have to be careful about that, and to try to keep up with them, say, is like taking a $20 bill to a high-stakes poker game. Very quickly you're broke and you're out of the game. So we've got to be a little careful there, Dale.
Sure, and so from my perspective, I want to offer a couple of points around that. This community was reported in the Vancouver province last week. Dawson Creek is number 4 in the province in terms of the attractive community in BC to invest in. Surrey number 1, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge 2, Fort St. John 3, Dawson Creek 4. Yesterday they announced in a national publication, Dawson Creek was number 15 in Canada as the top small city to live in. So there's some components around our community that we sometimes, I don't think, appreciate or leverage to the point of we have some amazing amenities, we have an amazing quality of life, and as this focus of our community from the oil and gas industry, and honestly, I've engaged the industry over the last 6 or 7 months since I've been there, and You get an understanding of their plans, of what they're seeing, what they're doing, their impacts. So to me, absolutely every day I'm dealing with investors or people that are coming into our community to deal with wanting to invest in our community. It is seen as an attractive location to invest. Industry are absolutely ramping up activities as they build processing facilities, as they develop their infrastructure. This community is going to feel it. But you're right, there is a migration of some components of our commercial activity. But you know, you drive around the community, you go out in behind John Deere, and you go out up Vic Turner Way, and you go in on the east side of town, and you see the amount of commercial development that's going on, providing service to the industry. You look at some of that development, our community is developing, it is growing. We had a fairly significant amount of increased assessment in the community last year as a result of new assessment coming in. So we are feeling the growth, and we are experiencing it, and we will continue to do that. Honestly, I'm a little more conservative about saying we're going to be at 20,000 people, but absolutely, there's no doubt in my mind, seeing and interacting with the industry. I was out at Shell last week, been in with ARC and Canna and the major players. These guys have significant development plans for this region and the South Piece, and it's going to impact Dawson Creek. A 2,000-person work camp by Encana, 40 kilometers from our boundary, is an indicator of a significant investment that's going to be made by industry in the region, and it's going to impact our community. So I agree with you. I'm not huge on saying I think we're going to be touting 30,000 or 40,000 people. We are going to grow. We are going to experience growth, and we manage it and understand how we plan for it. Be deliberate and focused about that. So there's Ms. Miller had her question. Oh, sorry, Mel.
So that's 3 in front.
Okay.
Isn't the water from the Murray River more compatible than the water from the Peace?
You know, right off the top, Mel, I don't know if it's more compatible, but one thing that we did look at, and we've had some discussions with the ministry, is more so around impacts. And if we were going to go to a different river, water compatibility would be one component, but you have to look at the size of the river, the terrain you're going over, all those components as well. So the Peace is a bigger river, has large reservoirs behind it. Well, that would be something, all those factors would have to be considered. So I'm just saying, you know, water compatibility, those issues would be just one piece of the puzzle.
First, I'd like to say that I believe water is a very important part of our daily life. But my question is, I run a small sewing business from home, but in order to get my sewing supplies, I have to go out of town. Now, if industry needs water so badly to them to run their business, why don't they find their own water supplies? And if we want to supply their water, how about supplying me with a sewing supply store in town?
So industry are dealing with exactly that. And Canada has made a huge investment in terms of their water hub, using saline as an alternative and recycling, putting an infrastructure in place to do that. Shell have developed the reclaim facility here in town to be able to use that as their process. So industry are doing that, and so they. Sorry. Well, I'm hoping all the employees that work for those companies buy their groceries in Dawson Creek. Yeah. And the issue, and I talked to some of the people in the community about that, the retail sector, about what happens, and what they say to me is retail is the last piece to follow the development in a community. So you're going to get your residential, and you're going to get your commercial with the industry, and retail is the last piece. And I'm going to give you an example, because last October, November, I went and met with the head guy of Jimmy Pattison Group in Vancouver, in charge of the retail development sector for Pattison. I got into them. I got in to see them. And I said, you know, we got so many opportunities in the community of Dawson Creek with respect to property, buildings, it's accessible, it's, there's lots of market potential. And the response was, your business metrics don't make sense for us yet today. And so what that meant was, we first aren't huge supporters locally in lots of respects. We're too easy to get to Grande Prairie. And the balance then and the struggle for retail is, well, if I build it and people don't support it, then I'm in the dilemma. And the other component for the industry, for the retail sector, these guys was, you got to get to a certain population level before it makes sense for us to come in and make the investment in your community. So I give credit to Canadian Tire. They just did a huge expansion into our community, and it's a great store and it's a great facility. But we've lost, we talk about the dry cleaners. We've lost some of those components. We need to build the community because the retail will be the last cog that follows the development. As the population grows, as we experience growth, that retail is the final piece. And that's not me saying that, that's guys that I've engaged with in terms of saying, why is it so tough for us to attract retail into our community?
I have a question to the council. It's been bothering me for a while. You want to build a pipeline to the Peace River. Whereabouts on that Peace River are you going to enter that river with your pipeline? Is it above, or is it in Site C, or below?
Thanks for the question. Again, we haven't gone there just yet. We're very much at a conceptual stage. If we get down through this process and the residents and council want to move that way, then we'll do more detailed engineering and we'll look at options of where intakes would be appropriate, but we haven't looked that close yet.
You know, I was wondering about that because I couldn't understand why you were setting a figure on how much it was going to cost. You don't even know where you're going, eh? But anyway, I have something to say. I heard a lot of good information here tonight, and I heard a lot about water. Well, we all know what water is and we need it. But the most important thing is this. Fracking is one of the worst enemies of water. We all know that. I want to ask the council, did they ever contact anybody in the United States where 2 states have completely stopped fracking? Quebec stopped fracking. And you know why? Because that junk and chemicals that they're pumping down there eventually come up through their aquifers and spoil their soil. Now, there's a lot of farmers and ranchers throughout the North Peace and South Peace and further south who depend on their own wells. Now, you go out where the oil workers are all working out there, they've got wells almost the size of this building, maybe not as wide, 35 feet high, and to collect the underground water. So now, fracking contains a lot of different chemicals and dirty water. And they would take a lot of pressure to pump it into the ground. And then it does come. So the government, our government, provincial government, sent a man up here. He had an unopened meeting. He didn't do too well with the people. But anyway, he put an article in the paper. He said, he explained again that aquifers were natural channels where the water, underground water rises to and creates the underground water that the farmers use. He also said there's a lot of shale. We all know that. Shale's all over the place in this country. I worked on the railroad, and there was nothing. One of the biggest problems was shale. The water running through the shale and drop our track or something like that. And how am I going to put this? Anyway, one of the things that concerns me is when you go to pump water from the Peace River and all the shale, shale, pardon me, all this gas and everything else that's been pumped down there. It's going to destroy our water here. It's going to harm the farmers. In 25 years, they won't have a farm here. Their water will be so contaminated. Fort Nelson, they're just pumping thousands of gallons of water down, millions of gallons of water down there. And they got some beautiful, huge rivers there. They're going to be destroyed. They're almost pumped dry, most of them already. I'd invite all of you to go down to the Peace River tonight even, and look at how shallow it is. And of course, I've been told, yeah, well, they got to build up the water in the dam. It's not that at all. It's the people fracking out there are using so damn much of it that they got to keep building it up. So they cut the water off. The river's so dry that a couple of friends of mine went down the river for a 2-week trip. They only got the first day. They were hitting rocks, sandbars, everything else. So they pulled up for the night to camp, got up in the morning, the water had dropped another 2 feet. They had to drag everything down there a good 150 feet to get their boat back in the water, and they came home. That's how much water those people are using. They're pumping everything dry around here, and anything that is dry, you've heard the natives on TV talking about how hard they're having it because the Peace River and the rivers up where they live are being pumped dry. You know, there's no reason for us to have fracking. Yes, it's going to create a few good jobs for a short time, and you're talking about your city expanding. It's not going to expand, my friend, in my opinion. I don't know if you were around in the 70s here when the little splur the oil businesses had, and when they shut down, you could have bought an apartment for 50 grand. I had a friend buy a house for $30,000, and it was a mansion. And that's what's going to happen here. There's going to be a lot of disappointed people. This contract that you're talking about out there, they're not going to have any local contractors from here. That's going to be bid on. And they'll come with all brand new equipment. They don't want no breakdowns. All the battery, they build their own batteries. They have the forms. They have the mechanics. They have a special subcontractor to do the cats. Another for the belly dumps and huffs and all that. And they have a camp. They had a camp. They'll bring a camp whether we like it or not. They don't want to be driving their men into town for an hour or 2 hours at night, and the same thing in the morning. It costs them workers time, and it costs the contractor money. So you got to look ahead here. You know, he was a specialist at that type of thing. So I think before we go jumping over the fence, we're not going to be going to, 25, 30,000 people here. I'll guarantee you that. If you can tell me what's going to provide them with a job after the dam is built and the oil and the gas lines are in, there's going to be very little going on. There's going to be a lot of people caught down with their hands in their pocket. So we ought to be very careful.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is David, and myself, I'm very new to Dawson Creek, so I'm very impressed with how the city is engaging its citizens and in this conversation about talking to ensure our water supply in the future is going to be stable and consistent and provide good quality water. Now, my question is directed to our technical experts. I've seen in the phase 1 of the Sure Water project, there were several options explored, and it seems like the whole town, or that our impression was that the whole town was inclined to go with the pipeline option. Now, perhaps this was a well-informed decision by the citizens. But do we look at the vulnerability of our water in terms of its, prone to contamination by disasters, man-made accidents? Because while we are drawing water from the Peace River, we know in Chetwynd, a few years ago, there was an industrial accident where a spill caused the water to be contaminated in the river. So they had to resort to other sources. So they went with a deep groundwater. So they, started with wells and I'm just wondering about how Dawson Creek is gonna, explore our options in terms of all the ways we can instead of just going with the pipelines. And I think the citizens could use some bit more information on the risk assessments of all the various sources of water that we can potentially tap into, in addition to just the financial cost, because we can have the state-of-the-art water treatment and the pipeline and everything, but as soon as it's contaminated, it's no good and we have to resort to something else. So I think it's very important to do a full analysis of all the potential risk that these sources can have. And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So a couple of things. We are doing some of that exact work on the Kiskatna, on the source water protection plan. So identifying any hazards, looking at that, what the potential is, what the risks are. Another thing, the city, for as long as I've been there and many years before that, have been focusing on storage as a means to create that safety net, so to speak, if there was to be an incident. Storage will give you time to deal with issues, so that's why we've built up storage over the years. Currently, we've got a little over 100 days of storage between the river and town, so that enables us, if there was a spill or another incident, to either remedy the problem or seek out other sources. Third, if we go to a new source, we'd have to do that work again. We'd have to identify risks and how we could mitigate them moving forward. Again, things like storage.
Thanks, Kevin. This lady here in the...
I would like to know just how much it cost for you to do the Kiskatna watershed study.
Mary, are you talking about the risk assessment that I just spoke of?
No, you did a Kiskatna watershed study. That has been going on for a while, hasn't it? How much did that cost to do all of that?
I'm just going to pass that over to Reg. He's done work in the watershed for us for the last number of years.
Thank you. Reg White, and I was serving as a watershed steward since 2010. The program that was brought in 2009 has about a budget of about $250,000 committed a year. We haven't used all of that. 40,000 to 2009 has been allocated, and that covers salaries and contracts and consulting, partnerships that we've done with the UNBC. Part of that funding the budget didn't have to be used because the regional district supported some of that research at $40,000 a year, and that was renewed again last year for another couple of years. So at total, the watershed program itself has been going now for 4 years, essentially. Budgeted. The total budget amount, total budget. Over the last, how much has actually been spent? Sean or Kevin would be able to tell me more, but exactly. About half to 3/4 of that amount has been spent. So what has been discussed here, and the question that was just asked, and there's questions about fracking, and there's questions about groundwater and all of these pieces, to be able to understand how secure is the water supply, you have to know how much water is there. You have to do gauging on the river. You have to build up your understanding before you can talk about how much more of that water can be given to someone else, obviously like the industry. There's a lot of work to build up an understanding of the watershed. That's on the supply side. And we have to understand what's happening on the quality. So if there's industries working in the watershed, we work with them, we understand what they want to do, and we make sure that they're protecting our water supply. So that requires a lot of what are called referrals, getting out there, working with them, working with government. That's what a watershed program does. Vancouver's got one, Victoria's got one. A lot of communities have them, and the more activity you have, the more work it is. And part of what we're dealing with now is that we want to have a more thorough understanding of what's happening. Well, it's a different kind of situation. So you've got a supply that's there. BC Hydro operates a lot of gauging on the river. You don't have as much of that question about how much supply to be answered. Yeah.
Well, I think before we start doing all of these studies and going on like this, I think that if you look at Geoscience BC that are working with 7 oil companies right now and are doing a deep aquifer study of the whole of the Montney Play, could we not work in collaboration with them and maybe do other groundwater and other surface water studies instead of everybody going off in their own direction? Now Hudson Hope is wanting $300,000 to $400,000 for a water study. How many of these studies can we afford?
Yeah, and I absolutely, sitting at the regional district, I know that that exactly has come forward to the regional district, that they want to put $400,000 into studying the effects of the water wells for the rural areas. The Oil and Gas Commission are commissioning a study that they're going to kick off right away, and I think they've got it allocated at a couple $2 million for that. It's such, the polarization of the lens of this water for the entire region is getting a huge amount of attention. And how do you lasso that, Mary, in terms of your point, in terms of how we ensure we've got a cohesive, structured focus about what's happening to the water in our region?
I think last year when we talked about the same thing, I was mentioning there that I had been to a water conversation session all day in Fort St. John, and they said the only secure supply of water is the Peace River. So, like I say, I think we have to work together, like you say, lasso everybody, get them into a group. We can't just go off willy-nilly and everybody wanting to do a study of their own. The other thing I want to talk about is quite a few years ago, and I think Mr. Parslow was there, I could be wrong, but we talked about fair share. At that time, it was for capital improvements, but the residents of Dawson preferred to have it used for general revenue. They wanted their streets repaired, and it was used for that. How much of it was ever saved or put in a heritage fund like the Alberta government has done?
Yeah, so in 2005, the fair share agreement was renewed with the province. It was removed, the conditions. So it's like an industrial taxation. If that taxation, if it was a mill, if it was a plant that was located in our community, and it generated $13 million in revenue to us, no strings attached. You get to decide how that revenue is going to be used for your community. And so it removed that component around saying it had to be for infrastructure. So this year, for our budget, we have $6.2 million allocated towards capital, and I think 6.7 to operating. So out of $13 million, we've moved, and we're into the situation now where we're getting that revenue stream of fair share money into capital, so we plan for the future.
So how much do you plan on putting in every year?
In terms of from that revenue to capital?
From that fair share.
So it's, you got to remove the dependency on it from your operating costs. And so the only way to do that is when you have increased revenues from another stream. And this year we got that increased revenue from new assessment. And so $1.5 million come in new assessment. So we removed $1.5 million out of our operating budget back into capital from the fair share. So this year, last year we had $10 million allocated towards capital, or to operating. out of the 12 million we got from fair share. This year we got 13 million. We had an increase in it. We have so we removed 4 million out of operating into capital. So that's the plan for us, is to try to move that dependency on fair share out of our operating budget, put it into capital so we plan for the future of our infrastructure.
Okay, the other thing is, you've already, you're going to have to spend 16 or maybe 17 million on the Kiskatna, or the upgrade for your city water, all right? And then you say you have 5 to 7 million perhaps saved. So now you're at 24 million. You've spent nearly $1 million on a study for the Kiskatna watershed, so that's up to just about 25 million. And then you're going to spend $1 million on perhaps the Peace River, so you're up to about $26 million right there. So, you know, you're just about halfway there, but if you're going to keep on spending $1 million to get the water up on top of the hill on 17th Street and elsewhere, it seems to me like it's just a patchwork that's going on here. That's my opinion. And the other thing, we live in the country. I'm not here from Dawson Creek, but I don't think it should be a Dawson Creek project on their own. I think it should be regional. We all use the water, and then put some pumping stations there for landowners along the pipeline.
Well, so currently we absolutely, so the fill stations where we do supply our rural residents with that, I'm off. Sorry. My lips were moving, but I wasn't talking.
No, I couldn't hear you.
That happens a lot. So that water fill stations, we absolutely supply the rural residents with the potable water from the community. And absolutely, when I talk about engaging other levels of government, the regional district is one, right? And you say, we got to look at areas, the electoral areas, to say, is there a will on behalf of the electoral areas to engage in this conversation with the city, like we do with the provincial government, like we do the federal government?
Well, I think the residents have to decide, do you want just a residential city without industry? Then I think the tax burden is going to be yours to bear.
You know, it's amazing to me that, because we were engaged with the presentation I made to the Saddle Hills County in Alberta, and they want to engage with us as a community to say, is there some benefits to us in terms of leveraging and working together in a partnership for that? And the history in terms of working with our rural areas is an area that we need to explore further, to say the dependencies, the growth that occurs in our community, in our area, not only for us directly in the community, but our rural residents, is absolutely, they depend on us as a community, as POOS. So, so as we move down this road, I'm going to engage Leonard Hebert and Jerry Lynn and have that conversation and saying, you know what, we need to explore this. This is a big issue for all of us. Thank you. I'm sorry, are we going to have another meetings? Yeah, so I think we got, you know, we're engaging the survey process. We're trying to gather more input and feedback, and we start to see that and say, okay, now to Charlie's point, now do we put some diligence into saying, okay, now absolutely the residents are saying this is the direction we want to move in, and so then it's incumbent upon us to start to put that information together and put some diligence to that process for people to be able to have guided information about how and what we do. So we're running out of steam. We got folks leaving, and we're getting close to 9 o'clock. So,
if I may, just a short remark. Helmut here.
I hear you. I don't see you, but now I do.
Okay. I'm a rural resident. I buy the water from the city. It costs me $3.52 per cubic meter. The city is paying for the same water cubic meter $2.69. I really would like, and delivered that water to my residents, cost me $6.81 per cubic meter. I would appreciate if your talented staff could find a good gray water system. The other day was just on, was it Dragon Den or Sharks? There's a TV program. They were selling a system for gray water. It would be very much appreciated, not only for city people, also for rural people, to have a design, or the staff find a design what is suitable to install gray water. This could, I would say, maybe a quarter or more of the water what could be reused and would not cost much. And in my belief, that it would be possible for a lot of people to install that system to eliminate the millions of dollar expenditure extension at this time. And that could be done immediately, and everybody could tie in and we save water, and our system at the moment would last much longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. So sincerely, we appreciate the fact you guys give up some time, you give up your commitment to our community to be able to come and give us the guidance and the information and the discussion and the feedback to help us move forward in terms of then how we take those next steps. And then we're going to do the surveys, we're going to gather that information, we're going to start to communicate further in terms of directions and steps, the next steps that we take. And we're going to continue to inform our community about that aspect. So Kevin, do you want to, and Shelley and Jim, do you guys want to add anything more to that?
Just to really encourage you to fill out the surveys. And when the phone rings and it's not saying it's your captain calling, it's saying we're calling on behalf of the city of Dawson Creek to talk to you about water, please take a few minutes to actually answer the questions on the telephone as well.
So thank you everybody very much for coming out tonight, and we appreciate your participation.